Good morning. It's Monday morning. We get to start back on Granny Shares the Bible. Exodus 25, and let's start on verse 8. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them. A sanctuary, I looked it up, it's a consecrated place. And God is saying, make me a place where I can be, and it will be a special place for me, that I may dwell among them. A sanctuary. You know, a world that's full of sin. It's hard to find a place for God to be, and everybody hallow that place. Let that place be set apart for God. He wants us to be a sanctuary. Did you know that? He wants us to be a sanctuary for Him. We live in this wicked world, and the wickedness has been in us, but when Jesus' blood covers us, He washes us clean from that wickedness. And then we are a sanctuary. We're a consecrated place for the Lord to dwell in. Not only Jesus, but He said, I and my Father will make our abode in you. God too. And then when the Holy Ghost comes in, you're full of the whole Godhead. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost is in you. And you are a sanctuary for Him. And so this was Moses and them beginning this whole process of making God a sanctuary, and that I may dwell among them. So God had them to tell all the things that He needed as an offering from the children of Israel, so that they could make that sanctuary. Now verse 9 says, according to all that I show thee, after the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all the instruments thereof, even so shall you make it. So He's going to begin to tell them how to make it. And we're going to read through this and try to imagine what it looked like. And it says, and they shall make an ark of shittim wood. 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and 1 cubit and a half the breadth thereof, and 1 cubit and a half the height thereof. And thou shalt overlay it with pure gold, within and without shalt thou overlay it, and shalt make upon it a crown of gold round about. And thou shalt cast 4 rings of gold for it, and put them in the 4 corners thereof, and the 2 rings shall be in the one side of it, and the 2 rings in the other side of it. And thou shalt make staves of shittim wood, and overlay them with gold. And thou shalt put the staves into the rings by the sides of the ark, that the ark may be borne with them. The staves shall be in the rings of the ark, they shall not be taken from it. And thou shalt put into the ark the testimony which I shall give thee. So we're talking about the Ark of the Covenant. It's so amazing how there are 2 things called arks. One was the ark that Noah built, right? It was the ark. It was a container. I guess ark to God was just meaning a container. And it was the container of the animals and container of the people that God wanted to save when all the world was destroyed. So it was a precious container. And this is a precious container. It's a container. It was going to be a container of the 10 Commandments. It was going to be a precious place where the Spirit of God was going to abide with it, around it. That's the way it did when the ark, when they were floating on the water, the Spirit of God was helping them, bringing them through that flood. So this ark is a very special ark, and it was overlaid with pure gold within and without. So it was a golden box with a crown of gold around about it. and 4 rings of gold for it. Put them in the 4 corners thereof, and 2 rings on one side, 2 rings on the other side. And then the staves of shittim wood, overlaid them with gold. So everything was overlaid with gold. And don't you know, it probably was heavy. It probably was. And those staves were so that people could carry this rather than put it on a cart or something like that. It was made to be carried by man. So, and then verse 17 said, and thou shalt make a mercy seat of pure gold. 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and 1 cubit and a half the breadth thereof. And thou shalt make 2 cherubims of gold, of beaten work shalt thou make them in the 2 ends of the mercy seat. And 1 cherub on the one end, and the other cherub on the other end. Even of the mercy seat shall you make the cherubims on the 2 ends thereof. And the cherubim shall stretch forth their wings on high, covering the mercy seat with their wings, and their faces shall look one to another. Toward the mercy seat shall the faces of the cherubims be. And thou shalt put the mercy seat above upon the ark, and in the ark thou shalt put the testimony that I shall give thee. So God was directing the building, the making of this ark, and he was having them to make images of angels. And this is, he said for him to not make any graven image in the 10 Commandments. Let's go back to 20, Exodus chapter 20. He said, and thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. So he didn't want them to make graven images, and definitely not worship them. But this was different. This was to show how it was in heaven. The Ark of the Covenant was something that they carried around them to remind them of God in heaven. And he allowed them to make these cherubs. He told them to make these cherubim. He told them to make them with their wings covering what was known as the mercy seat. Now, I am so glad it was called the mercy seat and not the judgment seat. It's where the presence of God would be felt and known, and knew that this sanctuary that they were making for the Lord was for the presence of God to be there. And the Ark of the Covenant was going to be the very center of that sanctuary where the presence of God was. And the mercy seat was where he sat. And he was under the wings of those cherubims. So it was trying to show us what it was in heaven. And they were not golden cherubims. They were angels up there in heaven over the throne of God, spreading their wings over his throne. So we know that God did not want us to make graven images to worship, but he was trying to portray by the mercy seat what it was like to be there with him. And he said, and thou shalt put the mercy seat above upon the ark, and in the ark thou shalt put the testimony that I shall give thee. And again, he was talking about the 10 Commandments. And there I will meet with thee, and I will commune with thee from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubims which are upon the ark of the testimony, of all things which I will give thee in commandment unto the children of Israel. So God was planning to come and sit on this mercy seat. Thank God, not judgment seat, but mercy seat. He knew that for him to dwell among us, he was going to have to be very merciful. You know, what we might not even notice is mercy because we just kind of expect people to accept us as we are. He might look at us and think, oh, I guess I'll just have mercy on them because they're so pitiful. They're so bound by everything around them. Don't you think we are? And so he called it the mercy seat. And he said, I will meet with thee, and I will commune with thee from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubims which are upon the ark of the testimony, of all things which I will give thee in commandment unto the children of Israel. So God wanted them to realize that that was the symbol and the actual presence. That was his actual presence was going to be on that mercy seat. Verse 23, thou shalt also make a table of shittim wood. 2 cubits shall be the length thereof, and a cubit in the breadth thereof, and a cubit and a half the height thereof. So we know that a cubit, we probably went over this when he was in Genesis, when Noah was making the ark. But we know that a cubit is like 1.5 feet. It's something like, what was it? From the end of my finger to my elbow. I think it was supposed to be 1.5 cubits, a cubit. And then 1.5 cubits was 1.5 feet. And so when he's talking about cubits, if you want to think about how long that was, you just multiply 2 by 1.5 and you get 3, right? So the table was going to be 3 feet by and by 1.5 feet, 3 by 1.5 feet, and thereof, and 1.5 cubits the height thereof. So it's going to be up about 1.5 1/4. So it's going to be 1 3/4 feet high. So it was little, wasn't it? It wasn't high. It was only 1.25 feet high. So it was small. And when we look at the ark, it was what he said was it was 2.5 shall be the length. So it was 1.5 feet. So it'd be 3.5 plus another half, which would be 3 3/4 length. That's a yard. Okay, about like that length. And it was about 1.5 cubits the height, length thereof, and 1.5 cubits the breadth. So it was 1 3/4 feet this way. So it wasn't very large. It wasn't a very large box, and it wasn't very deep. It was like 1 3/4 feet deep, like that. Can't see it. Not very deep. And so you kind of can see the how big it was by those measurements. And then the table, and thou shalt overlay it with pure gold, and make thereto a crown of gold round about. And thou shalt make unto it a border of an handbreadth round about, and thou shalt make a golden crown to the border thereof round about. And thou shalt make for it 4 rings of gold, and put the rings in the 4 corners that are in the 4 feet thereof. Over against the border shall the rings be for tables, for places of the staves, to bear the table. And thou shalt make the staves of shittim wood, and overlay them with gold, that the table may be borne with them. So it was the table, it was the mercy seat, and it was the ark of the covenant, because the testimony was going to be inside of it. This is what he gave them the pattern to make. so that it would be just exactly the sanctuary the Lord wanted. And Moses was true, and that's how he had it made. Okay, I'm going to stop right there, and we'll come back to another place. Let's see. How far did I go? Okay, the staves to be born. Let's read 29 and 30 before we quit. And thou shalt make the dishes thereof, and spoons thereof, and covers thereof, and bowls thereof to cover withal. Of pure gold shalt thou make them, and thou shalt set upon the table showbread before me always. Okay, we will talk about that tomorrow. And I want you to consider how much gold this was. It was a lot of gold for somebody that, they were slaves in Egypt. They didn't have gold, I don't believe. But when they borrowed those jewels and all of that from the Egyptians and spoiled the Egyptians, they got enough gold to make what needed to be made for the tabernacle and for all of this that God wanted. And so that's why he had them to borrow that. That was their payment for being slaves. The only payment they got. And that was their payment for being slaves. And they were making dishes and spoons and covers and covering the staves and all of the mercy seat and the ark and the staves for it and the table and the staves for it. I mean, they were making all of that and covering it with pure gold. It was going to be a beautiful place, wasn't it? I've not seen a lot of gold, but when we go to heaven, the streets are going to be made of gold. They're going to be gold streets. So gold is a beautiful color. All right, we will start back and we will read about the candlestick tomorrow, okay? I'll see you then. Bye-bye.